Hello there, welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another crafting project today. I mentioned in my last beading video here on the channel, my first and only ever beading video here on the channel, that I thought the sort of design that I was doing that last time might easily be worked into something a little bit more spiderweb looking, so I wanted to go ahead and give it a try, and it turned out it took me quite a while to figure out exactly how to configure things, where the crimps needed to go to make this design possible, so I went through a couple of variations and finally landed on something that I think I'm ready to share with all of you. I did go ahead and use black French jet black glass beads again for my first couple of mock-up versions, but then I really wanted to try something that occurred to me the last time, which was to use clear beads on like a silver wire and try and create a almost iced over spiderweb, or like morning dew on a spiderweb sort of look. So that combo was what I wanted to use for my kind of final version of this design, and let's jump in and I'll show you how I made this necklace behind me. Here we are above my beading area, my beading mat again. Again, this is just a little velvet mat that holds your beads, keeps them from rolling around while you're working. And here's the black version of the necklace I just had on in the last clip. This one was the second version of this necklace that I made. I made another one before this that was even more of a mess, honestly. But I used black soft flex wire for this one because anywhere that the wire shows, I wanted it to blend in with the rest of the beads in the design. And so for this one, I'm using sterling silver soft flex wire. This is in the grade fine, I suppose. I wish I had this in ultra fine because they do have a very fine, like even finer wire than this, but they don't have it in the sterling silver color. So I ended up going with this one. And you can see this is a tiny little roll of this because it's only 10 feet of this wire, because being sterling silver, it is more expensive, of course. So I only bought 10 feet, which turned out to be just enough for this project, and only just. So if I hadn't made mock-ups and made more mistakes, then I would not have had enough wire for this. So, ooh. But I'm just cutting a piece about maybe 22 inches long. My necklace finishes about 17 inches here, so I cut a little bit extra so I have room to work on either side, of course. So I'm just using my other necklace as a base. After I'd finally figured out this design, it did take me 2 days and 2 trial necklaces before I got to this point here where I could make my final version. I don't know if my brain was just a little bit sludgy this last week or what's going on. I think I'm still a little bit hungover from the beginning of November here. Just a lot of stress this year here in 2020, you know? Ooh, but I'm starting out here beading just the central portion of the necklace where the festooning will be, as I called it last time. Last time I did the entire choker and finished it off first before I beaded the rest. This time I just wanted to have the central section kind of in working, so I didn't crimp anything until the very end of this project, you'll see. But what I did there is I first threaded on a silver crimp. Again, I was using sterling silver crimps to match the rest of this. I thought they would blend in best with the clear beads here. And then I'm threading on different beads. Mostly I have like size 6-ish, I think. I don't think they weren't labeled. Sometimes when you buy beads online, usually they have the size, but I was buying some of these at Michael's, and of course it's just like, what's on sale, you know? But I went with one size 6, like square cut bead, and then a seed bead, and then I was switched over to these size 4 roundels. Again, they're not actually size 4, they're just random beads from Michael's, but they seem like a size 4 to me. Again, you know, you can use whatever beads you have around or have purchased or whatever if you were going to make a necklace like this. But I'm just beading on about, I don't know, an inch to start here while I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I'm trying to decide on a design. Whenever I'm, you know, I don't usually have a plan of what beads go in what order before I sit down to do this sort of thing. So I am just kind of winging it or deciding as I go along. But just stringing on beads with a seed bead in between each one. The seed bead in between each bead is what makes the switch over to having a crimp between a bead seem so seamless, or seem quite invisible in the end, because every other bead has a seed bead in between it. When you put a crimp in between, you really can't tell the difference in the finished necklace, at least I don't think so. So we can zoom in here and I'll show you I've got another crimp on here. I've added my first additional crimp on. And again, you can reference the pattern I will link in the description below to see exactly where I left my crimps in my design. But basically, I started with the crimp up here, then I went and threaded on one size 6, a seed bead, another size 6, 3 size 4s with seed beads in between, all of these, another size 6, 3 seed beads again, or not seed beads, 3 size 4s again with seed beads, and then another crimp. This gets confusing and weird really quickly when I'm trying to read it out loud, which is why I just would say reference the pattern I'll include here. Here's the pattern here on the screen as well, so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see exactly which beads I put where by looking at this diagram. Everywhere I have a crimp instead of a seed bead, I have it in yellow here, so you can see the color-coded version of this as well if you would like to know exactly what size bead I have threaded on where. But I'm just going to go ahead and bead the central portion of this from crimp to crimp, so basically to the center and then mirroring it on the other side of the center here. is what I am doing here. And it just goes every other. So there's 3 of the size 4s in between the size 6s, and every other time I do 2 size 6s. See, again, if I just try and say it out loud, it doesn't make any sense. But hopefully you can kind of get the gist of what I'm after. Basically, after I bead up to the center, I just mirror everything I did on the other side. And then again, just finish off with a silver crimp there. So you can see I have it this mirrored. Either side of the necklace is the same with that center size 6 down there at the bottom. Like so. So now I can go ahead and tape off this other side. I don't have more than one of these springs, unfortunately. I used to have more than one, but I've had them for probably over 10 years, so who knows where that other spring went. Somewhere probably in this sewing room, in the back of a drawer somewhere. Who knows? I'll find it one day if I ever move out of this room. I'm just going to use some washi tape to tape the other side. That way, if I move this around, no beads come flying off. We don't want that. Alright, so now I have this central portion of my necklace here. It's about 8.5 inches long, for those of you wondering. And I have this other spare piece of wire here that had a kink in it that I will use to start beading the first part of our festooning here. So I'm just going to stick this piece of wire through that first size 6 up into the crimp. So I want to put it through that first bead and into the crimp. I will do a close-up of this as well here, grabbing my phone to shoot these close-ups. So here I have the 2 pieces of wire. You can see this one just goes through that bead and up into that crimp as well. I will put it into the spring too, so that end is held onto out here. Just want to anchor that through here. Eventually when I crimp that crimp down, or like crush the crimp to hold onto the wires, everything will be anchored and secured. This is why you want to have a fine wire or beading cord. If you're doing this by knotting silk cord, you could probably do this with knots instead of crimps if you were using like a silk thread or a thread. But of course the benefit of using wire is you can just use crimps on it. And then I'm just going to be beading this first little section here. But again, you want, sorry, I didn't finish my thought there. You want finer cords so that multiple strands of the cord will fit through the beads. My string that I'm using here, the soft flex wire in fine that I'm using here, multiple strands will fit through beads, but not through the seed beads. So anywhere that I need multiple strands of thread to fit through, I'm using a crimp instead of a seed bead, because the crimps have larger holes in them, basically. But I'm beading this first little festoon section here. It's about 1.5 inches before the teardrop itself at the bottom of this. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. So I'm just choosing some beads here, and I am threading on crimps as part of this design. So again, reference the pattern if you would like to make the same necklace I'm making here, basically. Because leaving the crimps inherent in the different sections is what allows the spider webbing to be done later. You have to have those crimps in order to go back and put in additional strands. So I'm going to use a seed bead at the bottom of my teardrop, and then I will feed back up through the other beads, but not through that seed bead, so that it serves as an anchor here at the bottom of my teardrop. So I'm going back up through the teardrop and through the little round bead I had on top of it, and then skipping over, there's a crimp there. But I'm not going through that crimp, I'm just going to leave it there. But you can see I'm threading back up through the teardrop and this round bead on top of it like its little hat, little cap at the top of this teardrop, and I will pull this taut. And do be careful, because once you put this much of a curve or a kink into this wire, it will hold it forever. Especially this wire is quite soft, so only pull tight when you're sure you have it right. Oh, it kind of rhymes. That's unfortunate, but there's that. So there's our first little drop section here, kind of the arm of our spider web. And this next wire that hangs down, which is kind of the bottom of the spider web on this side, you'll see in the drawing above here. So this gets beaded with seed beads. So I just covered this entire section with about 2.5 inches of seed beads. So I'm about to go ahead and do that. I did thread on every once in a while a very small like glass bead, like one of the size 4s, just to look like a bigger drop of dew, and I did that quite randomly, so you can see I just have one on here. And then I will go ahead and tape off the end of this string or wire for now, because we're just going to let that hang loose for now while we bead different parts of this necklace that it will eventually need to be anchored to. So just let that hang over here for now, hang out while we work on the next bit, which is going to be the little festoon arm that comes down from here. So again, I've cut another piece of wire that's the same length as my first piece, basically the same length as the necklace, probably around 20 inches long, this piece of wire again. And I'm going to anchor this point through the other crimp that we left on this side of the design. So again, I'm stringing up through one of those size 6s into the crimp, and then again I will put some washi tape on the end of that to anchor it, or at least I hope I do. I might have been living on the edge and not taping all of my threads here. Anyway, so I'm up through that size 6, up through a crimp. You can see how that's hanging on here. And yes, here I am adding some tape to the end of that so that when I'm pulling on it later, I don't accidentally pull it right out of there. And again, eventually this other strand will anchor to this. So I'm going to start with 2 seed beads, and then I'm going to bead a drop that's about 2 inches long before, again, the final like little finial of teardrop bead on the end. And again, I'm leaving crimps strategically in this design, so reference the pattern if you'd like to see exactly where I have my crimps here in order to make all this spider webbing possible. And then again, after the wire is fed up through the teardrop here and through the crimp above it, actually, there's a crimp above this one, I'm just threading on more seed beads again to create the bottom part of the spiderweb for the central part of the necklace. And then once I reach the center here, we are now at the very center bottom of the necklace. So I'm going to thread on a crimp, a size 4 round, and then another teardrop. And then at the bottom of the teardrop, once again, I'll be using a seed bead to anchor the teardrop down there. But this is the very bottom tip of the necklace now. So it's kind of, you have your first wire for the central part of the necklace, and then you're adding on these main like festoony structural bits, and then we can fill in the spiderweb later. So you'll see how it kind of comes together here. I do want to pull this under quite some tension here, just because I would rather have it start a little bit tight and then add a little bit of tension later if I need to. So I'm going back up through that teardrop, back up through the round above it, and back up through the crimp that is above the round. So you can see here how I have that before I pull it taut, but I will go ahead and pull that taut like so. And then I can basically mirror what I just did on the other side. So I'm going to do the same 2 steps again, or 2 little, I guess, curves once again. And again, in the seed beaded sections where it's mostly seed beads, oh, you'll see me use a pin here to tighten those down. I'll talk about that more in a minute. You'll see me do it again. But I've just created this first part of my spiderweb down here at the bottom of the necklace. So I'm just going to mirror what I did again on that side, on this side. And again, I am using a couple of random bigger dewdrops amongst all these seed beads, but I'm not, you know, planning exactly where they're going to be. I'm just trying to make it look natural in the sense of that it's kind of different on each side. I just want to bead that section to be the same length as I had on the other side here, so I'm just taking a few beads off. This is actually about 3 inches here, for those who are wondering my measurements, but I'm just trying to make it equal on either side, because this is quite symmetrical, as spiderwebs do sometimes tend to be. Not really, they're quite asymmetric once you look closely. Alright, so once again, I need to feed on a crimp, a small bead, and then the other teardrop for this other side. This is just mirroring what I had done on the first end there. Kind of sometimes working reverse though. This is why it's like doing like Sudoku or some sort of like mental puzzle in some ways, of like mirroring different sections, things like that. Oh, there again, I used the pin. So I just stick the pin in between the wire and then pull down, and it just helps me get a tight tension down by the teardrop more than I can with my like big fumbly fingers, of course. But that's going on there. But the mental gymnastics to figure out where the crimps need to be and how to like mirror the design was just a little bit too much for me this week. I think I'm a little bit burnt out. I did take a little bit of rest after all that costuming, but I think I don't know what an appropriate amount of rest is. So potentially, you know, I should have taken a little more. But here we are, trucking through here in 2020. Now that I've reached the other side, the same way that I mirrored the first side, or mirroring the first side, I can go ahead and tape off that wire again over here. I keep wanting to call it thread, still. I had that problem in the last video. But now we have this kind of central portion of the necklace, and this first little floop over here, we can thread through one of the crimps on this side. So that's why you leave the crimps in this design, of course, because then later you can feed through these little friends. And I try and feed them through the crimp and then like a bead below it as well, at least, just to truly anchor it in there and kind of give it the right shape almost. It wants to, because the wire has a certain amount of like spring or stiffness to it, it helps if you feed it down into a few beads to get that curved, spiderwebby, floopy shape. Again, technical term, floopy. I'm trying to figure out how long I need to cut my next piece of wire here to be able to do the second floop. So I just cut a little piece about maybe 6 or 7 inches long, so that I can do the same thing on this other side once again. Again, taping off that end. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a bunch of these little springs? I should get some more. I'm sure they're not that expensive. But I have not upgraded my beading tools in a long time, and I really need to because my wire cutters are an embarrassment. They're hard to use because they're so misshapen from trying to cut thicker or like harder head pins over the years. They've like ruined the surface of my wire cutter, so cutting fine wire like this is now like nearly impossible because I've damaged my wire cutters so much. So I really need to get new ones. It's on my Christmas list for myself, this year. Again, I'm just kind of mirroring the same thing that I did on the other side. I actually did end up counting how many seed beads I put on that little floop so I could make it the very same. And now I'm going to start beading more sections of the center here. So again, I've anchored a little bit of wire. I'm cutting these like center wires probably only like, I don't know, 4 inches long maybe, if that. So I've anchored that, and then I anchor it up through a bead along the main necklace you can see here too. I forgot to film that. I'll show you a little bit more in a second when you see me do the other side. And then I'm just going to feed this wire down through the same crimp and round and etc. that was down here. So I'm creating the middle of my necklace just with this little piece of wire here. So again, I need to do the other side here. Reference my drawing for a better visual representation of what the heck is happening here. But again, just anchoring this little piece of wire in one of the crimps on this leg over here. Then I can put, I think it was like 18 seed beads that I needed to put on to create this little, I don't know, buttress up here, to use cathedral terms, before I could thread it through that size 6 that's along the main length of the necklace here. You can see me doing that here. So again, just feed that through this bead up here to anchor it. It did not want to play nicely for some reason. Behave. I almost lost the end of it, see? Ooh, that's why you start taping the ends, because it's really easy for the ends to be pulled through. Anyway, so I have that through these 2 crimps here and a couple of beads, and then up through that bead, and then down. I'm going to go down into this same section, central section here. So again, I need about, I don't know, 20 seed beads or whatever it was in here. Depends on the size of seed bead you're using, how many beads you're going to need, So I'm just going to feed through that crimp again, down through this central section of larger beads, all the way down into the teardrop if I can reach down there. This is why, again, you need fine wires that many strands will go through one bead, one crimp, etc., etc. Because if you have a thick wire, you're not going to be able to fit them through like this and be able to thread them through like that. Try and clean up my workspace a little bit here. I don't know where I took my shovel. There it is. It's so satisfying to see the little bead shovel do its work, and to do it, honestly. So one of the better tools I have around here, that little shovel. And then now I can take these shorter sections of wire and fill in my spider webs. So again, there's another bead that I had left in the design over here. So we'll go ahead and stick the end of my wire through there. Try to, at least. I try and get it through as many beads below as I can, just because the multiple anchor points, the stronger the necklace, So now I'm going to bead this with, again, seed beads and a couple of extra dewdrops. Dewdrops? Dewdrops? Can I talk today? The answer is no. Sadly, no. Again, this is actually, you want to bead this to be about the same length as the strand underneath it. So I think it's probably the same. I think the strand underneath was like 34 beads and this was like 33 beads or something like that. So it's about the same length. So 2.5 inches-ish. And I fed that back down through a crimp and into the leg of that side, so we can get that same sort of curved shape on that side. And then I will do the same on the other side of the necklace. Again, just kind of including a few dewdrops at different points so that it looks a little bit more like ice frozen on an actual spider web. Here I am counting the beads, so I know how many I need to put over here vaguely. I am trying to keep it symmetrical but not symmetrical. You know what I'm saying? I hope you were all well and staying safe out there. It was actually a little bit snowy and iced over here for a little bit, but then it got much warmer again this week, which I was pleased about because it meant I could have one last picnic with my friend. My best friend and I have been having a lot of picnic dates, socially distanced, picnic dates where we're not allowed to give each other a hug or anything. But it was actually warmer this last week. It was in the 70s here in Colorado, so I went and had one last picnic date with her this week. But now that it's going to get cold and frosted over, I don't know when I'll be able to see her again because we can't hang out indoors, of course, so could be a while now that picnic season is over. I'm a little bit bummed. Luckily, we do have some warm winter days here in Colorado, so we'll just have to keep an eye on the weather so we can see when we can hang out again. Or at least, sort of hang out. It's still not the same as, like, getting some treats and watching a Disney movie on our couch like we would normally do. But, alas, back to fully virtual friendship once again. And again, I'm just doing the same sort of technique here on the center to fill in the next rungs of my spider web in here. Again, they just get fed through different crimps that are left in the legs, like the main larger bead sections of this. And so now I have the 2 swoops on either side, and I can put in my last set of swoops, or fwoops, or whatever I was calling them a second ago, floopy bits. My last set of floopy bits here in the center, and we have a lot of little wires sticking out, as you can see now. And they all are not taped, so it's a very risky business at this point in the journey. And again, I'm counting a lot of the beads to make sure I have the same number on each side. Even if they're not all in the same arrangement, I want them to have the same number. So now it's time to start crimping everything. And I didn't do a very good job of filming all this, unfortunately, just because I think my camera timed out. It only records in 20-minute segments after all. But anyway, I have this 2-step crimp tool. The first step of the tool crushes the crimp into a little C shape, and then the second step closes that C up on itself. You can probably, I'll link below a video of a crimp being crimped close up, because it's not a kind of easy video for me to take, that kind of macro shot. And before I start crimping all of these, I am going to tape off a few more of these strands, because I'll be moving the necklace around and like picking it up to get in next to those crimps, so I want to be able to move it without worrying about all these ends coming undone. But you can see it's quite crowded in here, where all these little crimps are, but I just have to crush them down, and that will hold on to all these little wires. But there's a lot of little ends sticking out. Hopefully each end is like encompassed in at least 1 or 2 crimps along the strand here. That way it's anchored in a few places. But I'm basically going from left to right, and like going down each strand individually and crimping as I go. And here you can see I'm leaving a little bit of extra wire, of extra slack. I'm not pulling these completely tight over here. I want to leave a little bit of extra wire. That's why I'm using wire that matches my project, that is like the same color as the beads, because it'll blend in and you won't see it as much. But you do want to leave a little bit of floop in here, because if you pull it too tight, you can see actually on the left here, I pulled those first 2 strands a little bit too tight and they kind of stick up. Now when they sit against your neck, luckily they kind of flatten out a little bit, but the more actually slack and you leave in here, the nicer the nicer drape this whole thing has. So that's something to remember, is to leave like maybe 2 seed beads worth of extra slack in all of these sections before you crimp them all the way down. And going from left to right means that like I can crimp down one side and then pull the end of the wire on the other side to perfect the tension before I crimp the crimp over there. Hopefully, again, you understand what I mean. This is kind of the most complex and most like, I don't know, tense part of this whole thing, is doing all these crimps. And I finished with the last crimp on the right-hand side, mirroring perfectly where I started on the left-hand side. But now the central part of my necklace is all done. I'm just going to go through and double check and make sure I crimped all of my crimps and I didn't forget any of them in here. And then of course you have to cut off all the little extra wires that stick out of places, but hopefully at this point it looks something like this, honestly. And now I can go ahead and bead the rest of my necklace. The last time, again, I started with having the whole central necklace beaded, but this time I just wanted to focus on figuring out how the central portion of the whole thing worked, kind of like the bib portion of the necklace worked, before I even beaded the tails. But now I can just go ahead and use whatever beads I have left, basically stringing on larger beads, again with a seed bead in between each one, to bead the back side of my necklace. And you can see here I was just holding that up to the mirror to see if I liked the length of this, and I decided I wanted to add 2 more beads onto here. So you can see I pulled those aside, and I'm actually going to be using a little brushed silver lobster clasp for this, because I didn't have any sterling silver clasps in stock. I should have bought one when I bought these beads, but I didn't realize. So here we are. So I'm just going to feed on another seed bead, another of these roundels, and then a crimp, and then a seed bead, a roundel. Oh, and then a seed bead. All right, and then a crimp, I guess. And again, I'm just going to clip this closed, hold this closed, and try it on again just to make sure I'm happy with the length. Of course, you could just make this a little bit shorter and then have an extender chain back here, but I didn't have any chain in stock, so I didn't want to do that. Also, extender chains seem to be kind of like a newer invention, so if you want something to look a little bit more vintage, or in this case, kind of antique inspired, perhaps an extender chain isn't the best way to go, but it is more versatile, of course. Here I just threaded a crimp on, threaded my clasp on, and then went back through the crimp so I could hold my clasp on the very end of this. And I will just cut that off with my terrible wire cutters. And then for the other side, I actually end up taking the round bead off that I had put on and just threaded on 3 seed beads. Just gives me a little bit more room back here with my fingers to be able to do up the clasp myself, because I don't have a lady's maid to put my jewelry on for me. And then I was having a terrible time Trying to thread this back through. This is, again, the third necklace I've made this week. I made this last week, so at this point, like, even like my dexterity was kind of tired. So I was like, oh my god, my fingers are done. Thank goodness this necklace is over. Cut off a little bit of extra there, and my necklace is all finished. That last bit was so easy after all the middle stuff. But here is my finished Snowflake spiderweb necklace. I hope you all enjoyed this project today. I'll be back with some more vintage fashion next week, and then eventually here we'll be jumping back into the cicada gown project, back over to some more Victorian historic costuming to finish off the day bodice for that one, so I have to jump into another mock-up, etc., etc., but I did manage to get a few more yards of our green taffeta, so I don't have to worry about not having enough now, which is a super relief. Thank you as always for watching today, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.